Our guest today is Londa Schibinger, professor of history of science at Stanford University and director of gendered innovations in science, health and medicine, engineering and environment. Good morning, professor.
Good morning.
So Professor Schibinger will be one of the main speakers at the Open Innovation Days here in Padova next Friday, 26th of October. Last July, she just published, along with her colleague James Zhu, a comment in Nature entitled "Artificial Intelligence Can Be Sexist and Racist. It's Time to Make It Fair." So, Professor, how is it possible that artificial intelligence earned this label of sexist and racist? Can you tell us here what happened?
Yeah, artificial intelligence, of course, is becoming more and more important all the time. We humans like to give to machines our boring tasks. We like to let machines help us do things. But what we've realized is that human bias is picked up by algorithms and perpetuated into the future or even amplified. And what I'm worried about is this amplification. So a lot of my colleagues in the past years have told me, well, algorithms are completely objective. They're just processes and they can't possibly have any bias in them. But we have learned that this is not the case because the machine learning also learns human bias. And that bias can be in the data or in the algorithm, mostly in the data. So let me just give you a couple of quick examples. So if you do Google search and you're looking for a job, say you're a young person looking for a job, one of the researchers has discovered that Google search returns high-paying jobs, that is jobs over 200,000 US dollars per year, 5 times more often to men than for women. Now this makes a lot of sense if you think about it because Google is trying to get the ad to the right person. And anybody knows, including machines, know that men typically earn more than women. Therefore, it makes a lot of sense when the machine profiles you that it will return ads for high-paying jobs to men rather than women.
So, you argue that there are systematic problems for which we need to find systematic solutions, and one of these problems comes from data, and in particular how data are collected. In the article on Nature, you give a couple of examples about that. Can you tell us what are these systematic bias with data?
Well, there's all kinds of bias. Anywhere where there's data, there can be bias. So we were impressed by people, the medical. So machine learning and artificial intelligence can be very useful to the medical profession, can be very useful for healthcare. But we were very impressed that there's now an application which can identify skin cancer. So it can see skin cancers almost as well as physicians can see and diagnose skin cancers. But we learned that the data is primarily from people with white skin, so people of European origins, and we don't know what the outcome will be for people with darker skin. Now, of course, people with lighter skin get more skin cancers than people with darker skin, but nonetheless, the application should work equally for people in general. So that's one type of example, and a very serious kind of example. Another medical example is GWAS, looking at the human genome, and we see again that 80% of that data is collected from people of European ancestry, and it won't work as well for Asians, for Africans, it won't work for other people in the world, and therefore we need to get the data right. And if I could give you just one third example, which we featured in the Nature comment, and people should look at it because it's really visually quite striking. We were looking at ImageNet, which is millions and millions of images on the web, which are labeled. And this is the way, if you search, you want to do a search of CEOs, for instance, you type in CEOs and you get pictures. Well, the way that these images are labeled and the imbalance in the data is really important. We looked at 2 brides in this data, and there's a typical European bride in a white dress and, looking very bride-like to us. And yes, she's labeled bride, wedding, that sort of thing. And then there's the image of a North Indian bride, and she is not recognized by the data as a bride. She is seen as a costume, performance art, red, because most of the data in ImageNet comes from the US and from Western Europe. The US, I think almost half of the data in the database is from the US, even though we're only 4% of the population, whereas China and India make up 36% of the population, and they're only 3% in the database. So we see that because of the imbalance of data, you're going to get bias.
So basically, these data are collected in a way that encode ethnic, cultural, or even gender biases. But another source of bias comes from algorithms themselves. And you make another example in this Nature article about algorithm biases, right?
Yeah, right. So, but algorithms can also be your friends because you can use them to debias the human bias. I'm very impressed by, my colleague is named James Zoe, it's pronounced Zoe, and he and a group, first at Microsoft Research, and he's now come to Stanford, and we're having lots of great collaborations because I'm very impressed with his work. And also, I do want to make the important point, I'm a humanist, and I'm a historian of science, and I work a lot now with engineers and computer scientists, and we find that it's very important for the technical people to join up with the social scientists in order for all of us to see what's going on. It takes an interdisciplinary group to really get it all correct. So I was very impressed with their debiasing in a technique called word embedding. So sometimes you can't control the data. What I was talking about before with the brides and with the job searches and stuff, you should and could control the data. But sometimes we use databases where you cannot control the data, so you can't remove the bias from the data or create a better data set. And that's something for natural language processing, you're using human language. So a lot of research is being done using the entire English corpus online. So you can't start debiasing the English language because then you can't study it. You would ruin, what it is you're studying. So they have this interesting technique with word embedding that they found, for example, that in the English language, there are systematic biases. So if you type in man, that's going to be more often associated with the words computer scientist. And if you type in the word woman, it's going to be more associated with homemaker. So we see these very stereotypical roles for men and women, which are deeply embedded in the language. So what James Zoe and his group was able to do is to take, word embedding sees words as vectors in geometric associations in vector space, and they're able to pull out the sexist string while leaving the other words in their appropriate associations. So there are now many techniques that can be used to make the algorithm fair. And I'm really excited because at the same time that we want to point out biases, we want to find solutions.
But is it the artificial intelligence that is sexist and racist, or is it us? Because after all, these artificial intelligence softwares are fed with big data that we produce, that we white, so-called civilized Western humans produce. So are they just a mirror of our society?
Well, so this very nice computer scientist, James Zoe, came to my class. As I said, I'm a historian. He came to my class to give a talk, and he was talking about all of this. And he said, it's a lot easier to debias machine learning than it is to debias human society. And that's the truth. Human society is biased, and therefore that creeps into the algorithms. But the thing is, if we humans do nothing, then this bias which we have will be perpetuated. So the deal is that right now, governments, I know Italy has gender equality legislation. The United States has all kinds of equality legislation. Google has equality legislation for their company, equality guidelines. Stanford University, we all want to be equal, but at the same time, the products that we produce, these algorithms, are capturing the inequalities in society. Therefore, we must be active. If we do nothing, these historic inequalities will be perpetuated into the future. So we have to understand this feedback loop between human society and our technologies. And what we humans now need to do is carefully design our technologies to foster equality.
It looks like there's a lot of work to do there. And so...
Well, but we got a lot of people working on it. Stanford is just, we have the whole Gendered Innovations Project, which is focused on solutions. How do you create equality in science, health and medicine, engineering, and environment? So there are a lot of people working on it, and I think that we can make some progress.
So best wishes for this precious work, Professor. And thank you for the time you spent with us.
Great.
See you in a few days.
See you next week in Italy.
Yes. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.